Evening all. Stephen here, welcome back to my fireside of a Friday evening. He's going. How are you all doing? Here comes the boy staggering towards me under the tripod. I'm smoking my Polinsky. I won this, a monster of a pipe, but it's a lovely handmade pipe. I won this in a raffle, or a contest, a giveaway, from the Peaches 13, formerly of this parish. Very active members of the YTPC, but long since departed, unfortunately. In it, I'm smoking the good old Villager Tropical. I'm listening to the Reverend Al Green, an album released in 1974. Al Green explores your mind. You don't want to explore my mind, I tell you. You want to keep out of there. And I'm drinking. Can you guess what it is? Guinness. Cheers. Not any old Guinness. This is Guinness Foreign Extra, which I believe is still the oldest variant still produced by the company. As the name suggests, it was made for export, so it was strong and heavily hopped to help it survive the long sea journeys. And it's actually supposed to be closer in character to original Guinness, just bog standard Guinness of the 19th century, which was much, much stronger than the Guinness that we drink today. This is lovely stuff though. But this isn't Guinness Foreign Extra brewed in Dublin. Guinness Foreign Extra is very popular abroad in the Caribbean, in Asia, and particularly in Africa. So much so it's brewed in Africa in quite a lot of places. And it's particularly common and popular in Nigeria. So this one is brewed in Nigeria. And it's a different character to the Take Me to the River. I love this song. First heard it, of course, through the Talking Heads version in the on the, was it on More Songs About Buildings and Food? Anyway, I digress. So yeah, brewed in Nigeria, but it's different to the Dublin one because they use sorghum in the brewing process, so it gives it a different taste and a different character. It's lovely stuff. And because I have a massive West African community where I live, it's readily available in the local shops. Oh yes, 7.5% ABV. So you have to treat it with respect. You don't want to go spanking it down your neck like a session beer. Do, you're liable to pass out in your armchair and wake up in the early hours of the morning freezing cold with the television still on. Not that I've ever done that personally, of course. Moving swiftly on. I thought I'd touch on tonight something that occurred to me after I made last week's video. Cheers. And that was talking about these local houses that were all two up, two down. Many of them been converted with a loft conversion or an extension at the back, so they can create a 3-bedroom house, but an awful lot of them are still 2-bedroom. And I should say probably the majority of the houses around here are just occupied by 2 people, 3 at most, maybe a couple with a small child. And that set me thinking about when these houses, and for decades after these houses were first built, people had enormous families, far bigger families than we have now. And the amount of people that you'd actually have within a relatively small area. I'm sure these places were, probably had 4, 5, 6 people living in them. I mean, my mum, for instance, she was born 1926. And she was one of 7. She had 2 brothers and 4 sisters. And together with their mum and dad, they lived in a 3-bedroom Victorian terrace council house in Tottenham in North London. That's 9 people. 9 people living in a 3-bedroom house. Not a huge 3-bedroom house, relatively small. You really had to get on with each other in those days. The funny thing was, it was often the poorest people that had the biggest families. I mean, my mum's father, he was a porter at Liverpool Street Station up in the city. So I don't suppose he was making a huge amount of money. My mum used to take in washing, so you can imagine that as well in a 3-bedroom house, taking in laundry from other people and washing it and having it drying and ironing it. And I expect all the girls had to pitch in and help. And apparently she used to go out and clean houses as well, but she had to keep that a secret from her husband, because I can only guess he wouldn't want people seeing his wife going out to work, because it would sort of cast a shadow over his ability to support his own family. Working class pride. But yeah, she'd go out and do that. And then of course the kids had to do their bit as well. Excuse me a second. My mum was taken out of school when she was 14 in 1940. And her mum took her up to the local factory and got her taken on as an employee there. And that was the end of my mum's school days and childhood, effectively. I expect she had to take her pay packet home every week unopened and hand it over to her mother. And all the other siblings would have been doing the same. They were never evacuated during the war. I mean, my mum lived and worked in London all through the Blitz and right up to the end of the war. So they were tough times. Times we find difficult to imagine now, to relate to. My father's family was even bigger. He was the youngest of 8. He had, the youngest of 8, and all the others were girls. He had 7 sisters, all older than him. And there had been other children, including other boys, but they died in infancy, because child mortality in inner cities in those days was horrific. So he was the only surviving boy, and he was the last child born in the family. Because his dad died. His father died when my dad was only 2 years old. He died of TB, which he probably picked up in the trenches in France in World War I. So my dad was raised by his mum and his 7 sisters. And and they lived in a flat in Islington. Islington is massively expensive, very select inner London borough now. 100 years ago, totally different story. And they lived in a cold water flat. It was a Peabody Trust flat. And they had, let's say, there was no hot water. They shared a toilet with the other flat that was on the same landing as them. And probably didn't have that much space either. I bet my dad was spoiled rotten, being the youngest and the only boy. But the Peabody Trust is interesting. They've got places all over London. And it was established in the mid-19th century by an American, of all things. An American financier and philanthropist called George Peabody. He lived and worked in London and he'd fallen in love with it. And he wanted to do something to give something back to the city that he loved. And he had many thoughts, but finally settled on the idea of providing housing for London's poor. And I've had to write this down because I wouldn't remember it. Oh yeah, George Peabody himself was born into a poor family before he made and he worked his way up and made his riches, which is why he had this connection with the poor. But this is what he said when he established the trust and what it was for. To ameliorate the condition of the poor and needy of this great metropolis and to promote their comfort and happiness. Top bloke. So that's what they did. They built housing estates, 4 or 5 story high blocks of flats. I understand, I don't know if this was common to all of them, but it was certainly the intention that on the top floor of each block they'd also have communal facilities for baths and doing laundry. The idea was to get the poor out of the filthy slums they were living in and into something approaching decent accommodation. So that's a pretty worthy thing to do, I think. And the Peabody Trust, or the Peabody organisation, still exists to this day. And as I say, they've still got thousands of properties all over London. Well, of course, they'd all have been modernised by now, but you know. It was an incredible thing to do because the slums in Victorian London were appalling. I think I might cover something on that later. Especially, I've been thinking about sort of looking at Dickensian London as well. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. And when he died, George Peabody, with special permission of Queen Victoria herself, her personal permission, he was given a funeral in Westminster Abbey and was temporarily laid to rest there until the following year when the Prime Minister, William Gladstone, arranged for the newest and biggest ship of the Royal Navy, the pride of the Royal Navy, to take his remains back to America. And he was eventually laid to rest in Salem, Massachusetts, which is, you know, where he is to this day. So I thought that was quite interesting. Eventually my dad, say his father died, and they lived there for a while, and eventually they got moved out to another three bedroom Victorian terrace council house in Tottenham in North London, and then of course he went on to meet my mum. And they were married a couple of years after the war finished. I wish I could sort out how to include photos in these videos, because I've got a lovely picture I found of my dad with his mum and 6 of his sisters all standing together in a line in the back garden of their house in Tottenham. Taken in 1946 after he got back discharged from the Navy after the war, Second World War. Say only 6 of his sisters, because the other one was actually committed to an insane asylum when she was quite young. I don't know the full circumstances surrounding it, but she was to live the rest of her life there. Never came out, which is very sad. Obviously I never met her. That was the other thing, that my dad's mother, she must have been pretty much pregnant every year, because she had so many kids other than the 8 that survived, pretty much pregnant every year for the best part of 15 years. She was 39 when she had her last child, my dad. You'd think that would take a terrible toll on a woman's body. But she lived to be 90. She outlived her husband by 50 years. She never remarried. Excuse me. I better have a drink. I don't know how long I've been burbling on, to be honest with you. I've got a bit carried away. The record's finished, so it must be quite a while, so I better love you and leave you there. Thank you once again. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you all once again for watching. I do appreciate it, and I love reading your comments. I read every single comment underneath, and I really appreciate your online friendship and support. So cheers and thanks a lot. Excuse me. I think I'm going to go, because I think I'm going to have a coughing fit in a minute. So until we meet again, as it were, I wish you all a fond farewell. Are you ready? Let's go. Ooh. Ta-da, everyone.